Welcome back to the Bible Speaks Today from LBC TV Ministries. The cameraman and I are talking about injuries, and it's funny how as you get older all these little things start creeping up until suddenly something very minor happens and suddenly you're crippled in a way you thought never happened. I know it happened to me once with my back. But anyway, so we're back still I'm afraid. I'm not afraid, but I mean, if you're getting bored, I apologize, but we're still talking about the before King James era, and we finished up last week talking about the effect that Henry VIII had on the reading and the publication of the Bible. And just to recap very, very briefly, Henry was against Tyndale's version and wrote the letter to the Pope and said, wrote a letter saying how he wanted to defend the faith, and that comment, defender of the faith, is on the British coinage and everything today. Then when he couldn't get his own way with his various marital problems, he dumped the Pope very, very quickly, literally in the space of a few days, and assumed command of the Church of England and had Bibles made and distributed and placed in all the churches. And we finished up talking about the Great Bible, so-called because of its size and weight and everything else, not because it was particularly better than anyone else, although it was pretty good for its time. And at that time there was the Great Bible, which was in every church, or supposed to be, and then we had the Matthew Bible and then Coverdale's Bible. The Matthew and the Coverdale's Bible were kind of reliant on each other. But anyway, there they were, out there. It's kind of interesting to note, and I made a comment about people getting, really interested in the Bible. Bishop Bonner, who was the Bishop of London at the time, had 6 copies of the Great Bible. Now, that would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars in our money today to have these Bibles made. I mean, they literally, the only one I can remember seeing is about this big across, and say being round, and with the covers like almost half an inch thick, and it's all vellum and embossed and everything else. Anyway, in its colour, in colour and so on, which is no mean feat for the day. Anyway, he had 6 of these around there, and people thronged into St. Paul's to read the Bible. Other than prayer meeting and Sunday mornings, when was the last time you saw people thronging into church to read the Bible in group? Have somebody read it out to you. Okay? In fact, it got, what would happen is that somebody would start reading it, and then a discussion would start. Well, what is that? What did you say? So I said, I don't know, that's right. What does that mean? And so people would stand around. Let's imagine, say, 20 people standing around a lectern, and the Bible's there, and people are saying, hey, let me see what that says. I don't agree with that. Or, my priest says that that's not the way it is, okay? To the point where services in St. Paul's were being interrupted by people arguing about religion. Perish the thought, arguing about religion in church. But I mean, he threatened, literally, we have some records of some correspondence, he threatened to have them taken out. If you can't stop talking while we're having church services, we're going to take the Bibles out. Okay? Kind of interesting that the Bible to be that interesting, people be that interested in it as to actually disrupt church services to go and read it. And the Great Bible, there were 7 editions, so 7 different editions in 2 years. That's an awful lot of printing for the time. Really enthusiastic stuff, right? And it was continued in its, what you might say, the premier position. Whatever else happened, it continued in its premier position for almost 30 years. And considering the way things changed in those 30 years, it's remarkable that it did that. Okay? In fact, what's interesting, the English prayer book, the one that's used, the English Book of Common Prayer, not very familiar over here, I don't think, in America, but certainly in England, most people would know it. Most of the content of that is from the Great Bible. So it's still with us. Okay? Well, like a lot of things, if you give people a lot of freedom, they abuse it. That's pretty much standard anywhere, isn't it? I mean, if we have longer than 15-minute coffee breaks here between recording these programs, everybody's attention starts to drift and they wander off, and this sort of thing. And somebody has to remind us all that we need to get back and get on with it, as happened tonight. But it happens. If you suddenly say, okay, we're going to assume everybody is sensible, we're going to take all the speed limits off the roads, and people will drive at a speed consistent with the road surface, the type of road it is, blah, 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 blah. Well, perhaps, I don't know, 70% of the people would say, yeah, okay, on the freeway I can boot it up to 100, but on this back road here I've got to do 30 or 40. But there's the other 30% who'd say, hey, fast as I like, way, watch me go. And so they abuse it. And Henry, the same Henry who ordered the Bibles put in the churches, okay, became so annoyed because in his words, in a letter, that the sacred words of the Bible were disputed, rhymed, sung, messed up. People made jokes about them, hey, this sort of thing. It just got on his nerves, okay? They took liberties. There's no two ways about it, all right? So they thought, the public that is, that Henry was like, okay, you got the Bible free for all, make your own minds up, do what you like. That wasn't Henry's position. If you remember last week I said he didn't say anything about his own personal position. He just said, yes, you can have these Bibles. Henry was probably old-fashioned, not as far as marriage goes, of course, but old-fashioned as far as the Bible went. And the thought of people making up rhymes and saying, oh, well, other versions of the Bible, ours is the best and that sort of thing, really got on his nerves, I suppose, because he began to put restrictions on the Bible. The same man, same king, who some years before had made the Bible available to everybody, now starts to put restrictions on it. It's funny how things change, isn't it? Okay? You couldn't make notes. There were going to be no publications with notes or annotations. You couldn't make any on the Bible itself, although who would want to despoil something as wonderful as these wonderfully printed great Bibles? But anyway, you couldn't produce notes like chapter 4 says this, and I think that's probably wrong. You couldn't put annotations in, and those that were in there. This is an interesting thing. We've heard censorship. Those that were already there, and actually people had the temerity to write in these things, were to be blacked out. I saw a copy of a great Bible. I don't know which, not physically in the internet or in a book, I think, of a great Bible with great black, censored marks all the way down the margins where people had written comments and they'd been edited out. Okay. One more thing, only the upper classes. I don't know how Henry defined that. Probably landowners in those days. You either had land or you worked for somebody who did. All right. So only the upper classes were allowed to possess a Bible. Okay. So bit by bit, Henry starts clamping down on all this. And finally, about a year before he died, okay, all versions of the Bible were prohibited except the Great Bible, which is probably why so many of them have survived to this day. When I say so many, a few, okay? So, the idea was that by doing away with all the others, the Great Bible, because of its size, because of its cost of producing it and the size and everything, you couldn't use it secretly. It wasn't something you could carry under your coat and smuggle into a meeting. You probably need a horse and cart to drag the thing. But the point is that he made the Great Bible there, open, don't argue with it, don't make comments on, by the way, you can't own it, only you can. Okay? So, what happened then? In 1546, not very long after, not many years later, there was another Bible burning. Tyndale's, Coverdale's, Matthew, everything except the Great Bible was burnt. Okay? what happened then, of course, is that all the religious reformers, the people who were pushing for changes to the Religion Act, they all left the country, went to Frankfurt and Strasbourg and places like that. But the Bible remained. The great Bible remained. Henry died, but the Bible stayed. Okay? It kind of lived on. Well, after Henry, those of you who know your English history, no pop quizzes here, is Edward VI, the boy king, little boy, okay? He was 9 years old, he died at 15, so he wasn't with us for very long. There was a regency under Cranmer, under Archbishop Cranmer, which was a really bad time. I mean, they were a bunch of thieves. And the members of that regency, they robbed the churches blind. That's where most of you remember that Henry VIII is blamed for taking all the gold and the silver and everything out of the churches. In fact, it was Cranmer's bunch that did a large majority of that. Okay, but it's funny, and you know, they say God works in mysterious ways, but here is this ruling council, if you will, because the boy king can't make his own mind up, robbing the churches of all their valuables in the name of, it's in the king's name. The king runs the country. We're the king's representatives. Give us your gold and silver. Okay. While they were doing that, and enriching themselves, of course, they did the Bible a great service. They cast off all the restrictions on translation, on publication, on what you could have, what you couldn't have, who could own it, this sort of thing. Okay. In fact, the order for a great Bible in every church was renewed, and there was a document going around there by Erasmus, which was a paraphrase of the four Gospels. Now, I've never actually read this, but I don't really know. I guess you could do a paraphrase of the four Gospels. It wouldn't have as much meaning, but anyway, that was out there, and that was going to be added to it. So there's the Bible, the Old Testament, if you will, and then the paraphrase of the four Gospels. And in 6 years, in that period of time, nearly 50 editions of the Bible, 50 editions, in either parts of the Bible or the whole Bible or something, appeared in print. I mean, that would be today like, the books like the Vampire series and this sort of thing, or the Hobbit series, the selling like wildfire, and hotcakes couldn't keep them off on the shelves. They're selling so fast. That would be the same thing. And it was really fortunate that there was so many Bibles distributed and out there, because after Edward rather, came Mary. Okay, Mary Queen of Scots. Okay, and one commentator said, and then came the deluge. He said it in French, but that's what he meant. Okay, Mary went back to giving that nominal allegiance of England to the Pope. Okay, and of course utterly missed out with the people. Totally alienated herself, put England back under the control of the Pope, and that's it, And I think by then they were probably tired of the excesses of what Protestantism had become, the sort of thing that Henry had tried to curb towards the end of his life. And what had happened, of course, that people got tired of the excesses. Everyone's arguing about religion. Everyone's discussing it. Why can't we go back to the old way where, it was all pretty much cut and dried? And so they were tired of that. Okay? But I think they weren't ready yet, and still aren't today, to admit to the principle of foreign control in religious matters. We got away from that, and we don't want to go back again. I think a lot of Englishmen at the time were willing to have some sort of control over the use of the Bible, or restricted use, or how it was used, and then as long as it was done by their own sovereign, by the king or the queen. In other words, we did it, right or wrong, it's ours. We don't want somebody else doing it. Okay, so what happened was that the secret use of the different Bibles just increased. I mean, you know, there were some martyrs at that time. People got burnt as heretics, this sort of thing. But somebody quoted, but by the light of those martyr fires, people read their Bibles more eagerly. So if you try and repress something like this, it just bubbles out and you can't control it. Okay? And this persecution, this intense pressure on people to conform to doing it, you know, the way the Pope said, actually led to one of the best early versions of the Bible, which eventually led to the King James. But anyway, okay. But anyway, most of the senior, the leaders of the English Protestantism went into exile, and again they go to Frankfurt, or in fact a lot of them went to Geneva in Switzerland, actually. Okay, and in those two countries, education and scholarship and learning for the sake of learning, not for political motivations or to make money, but just for the joy of learning, just exceeded all bounds. I mean, they really got into it. And there, of course, these people found the material for a really in-depth scholarly study of the Bible. And there they made, I don't know how we say it, a new version, right? A new version of the Bible in English. And in fact, by all accounts, the very best that had ever been made up until that time. After Mary was dethroned and Elizabeth I took over, this Bible drove the Great Bible off. I mean, it was so much better than the Great Bible that the Great Bible was just pushed aside, which is why so few of them survive. There are some, but so few of them survived because it just wasn't the in thing anymore. This new one was. And during Elizabeth's reign, and you know she reigned a very long time, can't remember exactly how long, 30, 40 years at least, I think. But anyway, during her reign, 60 editions of this Bible appeared. I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, I don't know how many editions there's been of the NIV, you know, the New International Bible, but I bet it's not 60. Okay? This Bible was called the Genevan Bible. If you've done any Bible study at all, looked at some of the front end of your Bibles sometimes, and it refers to the Genevan Bible, this is the one we're talking about. Okay? Several things different. And it made several changes then that were radical at the time, but to us are very, very familiar. In the Geneva edition of 1560, so here we are, 1560, not much later, it first appeared without, with the division into verses like we have today. Imagine trying to remember Bible verses when they're not numbered, all right? The chapter division, I want to mention this, was made 300 years before. The Bible was in chapters in all these old ones we've been talking about, in chapters, but it was never in verses. Genevan put it into versions, okay? And it's the verses divided to make the Bible sort of more suitable, if you will, for what we do today, responsive reading, and for reading a reference. You know, you can say chapter 2, verse 6, and go right to it. Before you had to say chapter 2, and it's the bit about, and you've got to go through and find it. Okay? The Bible was actually taken, the Genevan Bible was in the work of a chap called Robert Stevens, and he's pretty famous, or well known, because he divided the Greek Testament into verses about 10 years earlier. Apparently he was on a long journey and spent the time, logically dividing it up into verses. I mean, you think about this. Who decided what verse should be what? Kind of a work. And of course, it probably won't mean much to anybody, but the Geneva went away from the Roman, or rather, went to the Roman from the old black letter, the Gothic type, went to the Roman, and also had all the the annotations, the notes on hard passages. In other words, where there was a, like, for example, Revelation, which everybody finds a little bit difficult at first or second reading, there were notes about that, on that, to help people understand it. Okay? And in fact, it was those notes, kind of interestingly enough, it was those notes that helped the people who made the King James. Okay? Now, it was completed after Elizabeth came to the throne, when most of the religious leaders had gone back there after being exiled to England. Now, it should be noted that Elizabeth herself wasn't a big ardent Protestant, yay-ho for the faith and all that, but not ardent at all religiously. In fact, there's very little that we know about Elizabeth's religious feelings, if you will. There's not much said about it. But she was an ardent Englishwoman. She understood the people. She understood what they wanted, and she used to say that she was the guardian of the middle way, not too far on the side. But she didn't make the mistake that Mary did of putting her sovereignty under foreign supervision. I mean, a lot of commentators or scholars believe that probably Elizabeth always counted herself as a Catholic, but not subject to the Roman Pope. So, here we have a queen under whom a new, really good Bible, the Geneva Bible, comes out, who is, whilst not ranting and raving about the benefits of Protestantism, certainly understands that that's what the country wants and goes with it. Okay? Okay, so now we find that there were two versions of the Bible in the field. The old Great Bible was out there still, although it's been pushed aside by the new Genevan Bible. And the Genevan Bible was the better and was pushing it out. But you could not get the Geneva Bible, what's the word, blessed by the Queen, getting the approval of the Queen. Because, and it's kind of odd this, John Knox had been part of the preparation, and so had Calvin, the two great reformers. And Elizabeth detested them, especially Knox. And the other thing, that the notes in there, some of the notes are not terribly favourable to sovereignty. So, although it had been made by her own people, which is a good thing, it would be made in a foreign land, in Geneva, Switzerland, so it was kind of suspect on that ground, okay? So, the Archbishop of Canterbury, England's leading Archbishop under Elizabeth, was called Parker, and he set out to have an authorised version made, called a revision committee together, with instructions to follow, not the Genevan, but where possible the Great Bible, to avoid bitter notes, and to make such a version that it might be freely, easily, and the comment is naturally read. And the result of that is called the Bishop's Bible. It was issued in 1568, 69. Elizabeth had been on throne 10 years. Okay? But there's no record that she ever noticed it or made a comment about it. Although it is recorded that he sent her a copy from his sickbed. It's kind of odd that the Bishop's Bible follows the Great Bible in general trends, but looks like the Genevan Bible in other ways, and it definitely shows the influence of the Genevan Bible, but doesn't get it credit. But it's almost as good as, okay? But it wasn't really equal, because it was expensive, cumbersome, and in a lot of places very unscholarly in biblical standards. Only its official standing, in other words, it had been approved by the church, gave it, or by the Archbishop, only its official standing allowed it to sort of promulgate. And after 40 years, 19 editions, and we said in 30 years there was 60 editions of the other one. Okay, it was no longer published. It fell out of use, okay? So, right during Elizabeth, we had the Great Bible, the Genevan Bible, and now we have the bishop's Bible. 3 Bibles, all leading up to the coming of the King James, and you can see how this is going. But look at the number of different editions of the Bible we have to get to just to this point, okay? And all the different influences. Each one of these Bibles is affected by and used by and altered from each other. And each one has merits in good here and bad there and good there, bad there. One of them's unscholarly, the other one's too churchified. You know, all of these different things are coming out during this Elizabethan age, if you like, without too much push, shall we say, without too much influence by the sovereign. So you can basically say these Bibles are being produced by the people at large. Okay, all right, it's by the church, but I mean it's not dictated to by the sovereign. And we've run out of time again, so until next week when we finish this off, hopefully, don't forget to read your Bible, and until then, good night, good luck.